Okay, so question. Um, who's more intelligent, Bannon or Epstein? Um, Epstein, so some people have been pushing back on the interview saying this hour and 57 minutes or whatever it is, it was supposedly a 12-hour interview between Bannon and Epstein, and saying, Epstein's just a midwit who's all hyped up on the notion that he knows more than the average man on the street about what's going on in economics. Um, I think that's a type of sort of reading. So I have it sort of deeply rooted in the following, in that I'll say I credit myself with a high degree of intellectual self-respect, in the sense that I don't, I have a high standard for what I think makes sense, and then I don't ever think I can get away with it by like saying something that doesn't make sense. And I think this is one of the points that when you are deeply rooted in a sense like that, and you've done it all your life, then you recognize someone who has a high degree of intellectual self-respect. So I could see, so I have an impression deeply rooted in my own being that says to me that this man has a high degree of intellectual self-respect, Epstein. I certainly don't think that of Bannon, and neither do I think it of Trump. Now, Bannon is more questionable because I always have this question with Bannon. I think to myself, well, yeah, but is that just because he's more balanced? Maybe it's a sign of an imbalance. So, like, somebody could be a genius in a certain domain, Van Gogh in painting, but is still cutting his ear off, or he's still, if he's a Dadaist, he's putting his feet in a bucket of ice water and then shouting out the first thing that comes to mind, and regarding it as a conduit to the transcendent realm, or to the unconscious. There could be special autisms, and then in a certain way, yes, as we were saying last time, Epstein does remind of Rain Man, or Dustin Hoffman's performance of Rain Man. And I say maybe he's a special idiot that has idiot savant in some area. That's possible. But I do think certainly in his domain, he's saying things that are provocative and not easy to decompose. And everything he's saying, though, much of it is, as it were, quote unquote, not original. It's neither is it whitewashed or sort of just worn out. It's rather he's sort of individuated it in his own way. So like, let's look at one example is, and let's try to ask let's make the question, who's more Socratic? Who's more like, that's better. Who's more like Socrates? Epstein or Bannon? I could say Bannon in a way plays dumb because he's doing the interview and he has to try to get get Epstein to say everything he can, and he's not trying to interfere with and argue with him too much. He's not trying to be too capacious. He is trying to be capacious. He's not trying to do too captious, say too niggling or sort of fault finding in a petty way, right? Therefore, he's trying to be generous, right? So in a way, he has to be sort of play this Socratic role in one sense of playing the irony, which amounts to the concealing of one's wisdom, as it were. Maybe there's some of that in a good interviewer. Or I suppose that should be said, Socratic irony is a kind of art of concealing one's superiority in order not to end up being put to death by the people you're talking to because you pissed them off too much. Of course, Socrates in the end didn't really succeed in the overall effect of his Socratic irony. It didn't. And this is a figure that goes back to the Greek, Platon in depicting his mentor, who I think Plato is like in his late 20s when Socrates died, uses this stock feature of the iron as against the know-it-all, which is a part of the old Greek comedy. And yeah, so Socrates always sort of plays that role, and then in a way Bannon looks like that in the way his certain moments, but then in other moments I think he looks retarded when he's sort of insisting, oh no, you must have felt this way and this and that, near to the end of this hour and 57 minute chunk. Now let's see one of the more like I said, provocative statements of Epstein, who was consistently saying, no, I don't understand the economy. Nobody understands the economy. I think I see sort of an element of chicanery and stupidity in Bannon. He's constantly producing these shows and trying to learn economics and trying to say, oh, we're going to get there. We're sort of looking at all this. This is what's really happening in the Trump economy or something. And whereas Epstein just says correctly, he says, no, nobody understands economics. But then that's sort of a Socratic move, right? Agamemnon is described as a mastermind like Zeus, remember? So there could be a mastermind who still isn't the Socrates type. There could be somebody beside from Socrates or beside from Odysseus who is good in counsel and a strong thinker, but not still less preferable overall in the larger scheme of things to Socrates or Odysseus or what I'm identifying with Hermes. Specific type of human personality that's repeated all again and again. So for instance, let me just give it, I know it's sort of a ridiculous, people ridicule me for this example, but I pick it deliberately because it's so prominent and people can look and then you could maybe you could see what's meant by personality and these repeating patterns that are captured in the Iliad and in other places. Tom Cruise is more like Agamemnon and more of an intellectual, as it were. He's taking up all these points about psychiatry with Matt Lauer or whatever, and this kind of thing. But it's not the content so much. It's just that he's quick-minded in some way. Then is Matthew McConaughey. Matthew McConaughey is more like the Achilles type. He's more like the Achilles type. The Ares type is hated by Zeus. Ares is the most hated by Zeus, and that's what the Iliad is. The Iliad is it's about war, and then Achilles is the human avatar, if you like, of war. So it seems like Epstein has a certain type of quick-mindedness and brilliance after a fashion. Now, I show you another figure, Jacques Derrida. Now, compare Jacques Derrida to Cruise and to Matthew McConaughey, who I think is still active in some kind of online setting. Now, of course, the problem with you could see there's something missing for for Cruise that McConaughey has. And then it's certain, maybe nerve in a certain way, certain kind of a certain kind of courage with people, maybe more. Cruz probably has more courage with things and with ideas, but with people he's kind of a little bit, he's at odds all the time, sort of. It's a little bit, it's a question. It's sort of like, yeah, he's always sort of struggling to put the other person in their place or something. You notice that in that Matt Lauer thing, and the way he deals with his interviews all the time. But I think it's a general feature of this type of. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Maybe that's it. That whole type is like that. That whole grouping is like that. Another example of the same relationship, so it's a continual geometric pattern, is, and again, I know it's silly, but I give this example as exactly because they're so prominent and they're available to everybody to look at, is the Star Trek Next Generation. Picard is more the Ares type, is more the Achilles type. Q, the guy who plays Q, is more the Agamemnon type. It's a difference in sort of the amount of brashness or boldness or something, and the amount of intellectual mastermindness or whatever. I mean, I can't describe it so much exactly in abstract terms, but it's right there if you just look at these relations. They're always repeating in human beings. But again, I'm trying to ask, like, so take those types that I gave, and then you have Derrida, you have Tom Cruise, and you have Matthew McConaughey. But now I'm sort of trying to fit Bannon into the Jacques Derrida type here. Whereas Trump you would place in a Hercules type, which is sort of somewhere, it's in the direction of both of Achilles and Agamemnon, but it somehow lives in another dimension. So it's like, as shown as Iliad doesn't, they didn't live in the same generation according to the way Iliad thinks it. And other Greek legends. I don't think there's any Greek legends where Hercules, Achilles, and Agamemnon live at the same generation. Because it's hard to think those, the relation of those personalities, although we have an actual case with Epstein and Trump, although it's unclear what their relationship was exactly. Like how they talk to one another, how much they're, what kind of things they discuss. So supposedly they discuss things about power, which is interesting because there's something in Trump's plot which is like our tact, which is like what Epstein describes as the trilateral group view, that since businessmen are around longer and they actually know what's happening in the country, whereas politicians are just sort of popular people that show up for a little while, it would be better for businessmen to run things. That's sort of this David Rockefeller Epstein version, which I think Trump must have discussed with Epstein. But now let's look at this saying, how much is it simply true and shows that Epstein has a greater vision of things about that nobody understands the economy. He also connects this up to the sort of Feynman type comment that nobody understands particle physics. But I thought his way of construing it is very worth considering, because he construes it by thinking you push something and then it falls. And then he thinks this is why Isaac Newton's notion of gravity is different than any, there used to be something called levity, which was the opposite of gravity, and it was all thought differently in the Greek version. And direction was absolute for Aristotle. It's absolute up, absolute down. Whereas Galileo said, it's how do you know it's not falling falling up or something. Falling, yeah, with something falls, but maybe it's falling up, maybe it's falling. You don't know which direction you are anymore. The famous Nietzsche saying could be cited, and and the thing about the man bringing in the lantern in to the agora in the daylight when lanterns don't need to be lit. Here, yeah, so in a way you could already put the postmodern in Newton, because Newton says, yeah, gravity is this radically mysterious thing, and then there's this side where we could sort of describe things with the math that describes these imperfect curves using basically and also it's very important, I think, that Epstein keeps describing it as a geometer, as Newton as a geometer, using what Descartes had developed, right? This ability to transfer between algebra, between the between, what's his name? I'm sorry, I forgot this. El-Khwarizmi, who's the name of the great Iranian who came up with this notion of the solving for unknowns, the algebra. El-Khwarizmi, I think. But having these two sides, the solving for unknowns, and then of course like imaginary numbers and stuff comes in the time of Leonardo da Vinci, and then this notion of the infinitesimals or the massive approximations in Newton and Leibniz. This gives you a new notion of sort of a strange dualism. And so I think Epstein is saying, he's basically saying, yeah, his overarching notion is the dualism of the quantifiable, which goes both for physics, the physics version of the revelation of what existence is, as it were, but plus also the economist version of what the revelation of existence is, because he's saying there's some people that have sort of a feeling for the ideas, and these brokers, the difference is a lot of people sort of have a feeling there's a fluctuation in the economy, but some of them go with it and act on it. It's kind of a Reignish factor in a way, or a Baroque factor. Heidegger thinks about it. But then everybody else sort of wants some kind of guarantee, some kind of thing that says, here's the probabilistics on it, here's the math on it. And then he says, so it's sort of like the notion of the poet as against the dialectician in Plato. But let's not push that right now, because it gets us distracted. But Epstein's notion is, yeah, nobody understands. There's a few people that can kind of sense the fluctuation and get in and make their move at the right time. And then there's also this other thing that Soros and maybe Besant has taken over, Scott Besant has taken over and brought to Trump, is choosing your spots. It's sort of, and then he gives the example of the Bank of England move, where it's destroyed the English pound in order to increase the strength of the German the Deutschmark that he was Deutschmarks that he was holding. Couldn't become euros yet at that time. And then I don't know, he made more than $1 billion, but then of course it's famous because it forced English to change their international policies and get out of the agreements they were in, because they simply couldn't sustain the benchmark exchange rate. And so, I mean, in that way, Soros then pushed towards his, the European Union project. He pushed everything towards the European Union project. And so it's like Epstein is saying, nobody understands the market, so they, you can't do anything long term. as Keynes would tell us. There's only the short term, but the short term is totally unpredictable, except some people have sort of this poetic impulse and they move on it and they're good at it. But that's like an inborn skill that can't really be communicated. It's not teachable. It's not reliable. It's not teachable. It's not logical. But he says there's this other thing, that's picking your spots, where every once in a while you could see where you could cheat and make a lot of money. So I think it's one thing you could say, yeah, okay, Epstein's just posing because he's been given a teaching it works, and maybe the whole thing about nobody understands the economy is just a Socratic irony and a pose, which I think in a way Bannon, he gets pissed off and starts acting like, oh, you're just posing, pretending or whatever. But I think we see that it's, whatever it is, Epstein is really thinking about it. It's like, because he's thinking about the same thing, both in terms of the questions of fundamental physics, like we don't understand fundamental physics, and then also seeing that at the level of economic moves. So I think it shows like really powerful thought, but then still I'm left with this question: is it an idiot savant's thought, or is it more important, the type of thinking, however stupid it is? It's not totally retarded, it's not Trump level retarded, but it's sort of like compared to the intellectual scruples of Epstein and what Epstein's doing. It's not very too serious. It doesn't look too serious from an intellectual point of view. It looks more like, I'm not seeing Charlie Rose, but I'm saying it's more like, you're just asking some questions, trying to get some information. But maybe this information, I guess the bad side of it would be, what if all this information is just information about the economy, which nobody understands, and all these things are just crystallized spider webs that distract us from the fact that we don't understand it. And then, in addition, you sell it to people as though, look, on my Bannon war room, I'm telling you people exactly how the economy works. Well, you may be telling. I think what happens is really they tell them to some extent, like, here's what's interesting to learn is here's the motives that the Fed is acting on. Here's the motives that some bankers or banksters are acting on, and this is the way they understand. Here's the Phillips curve and so on. But I think again, Epstein it's very interesting here in this saying, well, I only understood what I understood of it through the metaphor on the body, and that's very interesting in connection to all this stuff that like Babbage on Ivan Ilyin is doing on the notion of modern medicine being misguided, because just as in the economy, there's some people that understand certain, like niches. It's sort of like understanding certain functions of the liver, or certain being a podiatrist or something, being a specialist of some kind, but not understanding the body, really, not understanding the whole patient. And then your idea of personalized, specialized medicine is some kind of algorithm, AI fusion of the different specialities, instead of the way doctors used to do it, still around the year 1900 and past 1900, which is a personal relationship to the patient, and the doctor not thinking primarily ever in terms of specialism, in terms of a specialist knowledge of the liver or something is mainly at stake, but always thinking primarily about the idea that each disease is different, each patient is different, and not ever thinking so systematically and generalizably. It's interesting that even though we have so many generations of theories of economics, what we usually don't get is the actual presentation of which economics were actually mattered to the people that were running things. And I think you could see already, like David Rockefeller, the way he talks about it, he thinks really there's business and there's politics, and then the business people are doing something, whatever they're doing, but then there's some other thing, economics. It doesn't matter as much. But then what he's saying is, at a certain point, when the quant funds came in, in the 80s, when mathematical methods of creating derivatives and so on came in, and totally made it a huge complexity in the derivatives markets and in other ways. Then some kind of overall theory of then I guess just being good is probably better. I don't know, the overall theories, it seems it's a question. It's like, why does anybody learn Keynesian economics, which is all that's taught? In other words, macro and microeconomics, which is basically the two parts of post-Keynesian economics. Why did people learn that in the business school? Answer: it's because that's how they're supposed to talk. That's the way they're supposed to communicate themselves. It's the way everybody. That's the language of the profession. And I think that's another sign of Epstein's brilliance, is that he doesn't see the clothing, he doesn't see the fancy talk, he doesn't see the technical terms, he doesn't see the pomposity. He just notices, they're just using those technical terms for their own reasons, as it were. But what's really happening is nobody understands the economy, and he keeps saying nobody understands. And I think that's there's a strong tact in that. And then he has to come back and say, sort of like, for limited purposes, there are some people that understand certain elements of how the economy works, certain organs of the economy, and he sort of keeps pushing back and forth like this. But the whole economy, the whole body, and which has the workers for the fingers or the toes or the dactyls, and the banks for the major organs, according to the metaphor, how it all sort of hangs together. It's a very rich metaphor, though it may not be his own. I doubt it's his own, but he's individuated it and then connected it to this whole economy of or congeries of notions. Again, I'd ask anybody to answer the question, who's more intelligent here, and then give me something tangible to argue why is Bannon more to be understood as the Socrates or Hermes type or Odysseus type. I put those all together. I did something earlier on Bannon, maybe on questioning whether he could be a Odysseus type, should we more identify somebody like Epstein, the kind of mind Epstein has, the intellectuality of Epstein, with the Hermes type, or the ultimate type, but try to give some statement to go with it, rather than, if you're just to say it, then say because I look, and that's sort of how he strikes me, and it meets the comparison of the Iliad or something like that.